There we go. Okay. All right, so the first thing we got to do in a course like this is we got to figure out what in the world is religion. Not so easy to do. This is probably the hardest thing in the entire course, is to explain what religion is. Well, automatically, well, we know what religion is, but I'm not going to ask any one of you right now to define it. But we're going to do a little exercise here, and for this, I'm going to ask for you to participate. And let me get my whiteboard here. And what we're going to do is I want you to think about when you hear the word religion, what do you think of? And just so whatever those ideas, those words, those thoughts, I'm going to write them on the whiteboard here for us. Okay. So when you think about religion, what are some of the things that you think of?
God.
Okay, somebody said God. You don't have to raise your hand, just come off mute and say it, whatever you want. Okay, so somebody mentions God, but typically part of religion. What else do you think of?
Belief, just beliefs
Okay.
in general.
Sure. Beliefs. Okay. What else?
Faith.
Faith. Getting all the big ones here. Okay, what else? Good or bad? What are the impressions, the thoughts that you have when somebody says religion? What do you think of? What is religion? I mean, what would you say is part of religion? What's an aspect or an element of religion? These are big ones.
Would punishment also work?
Sure, reward and punishment.
Kind of going with that, like right and wrong.
Okay, yeah, so let's we can call, how about morals?
Yeah, that's good.
Norms and standards.
I was gonna say trust.
Trust, yeah. That's, related to faith, but I mean, it's also something we need to look at separately. Yes. What else?
I would say lifestyle.
Lifestyle, sure, absolutely. I mean, if you're not living it, what good is it? Right? It's just a theory, right? So if it doesn't have something, if it doesn't affect the way you live your life, religion obviously affects our living. Yes, go ahead. What else?
Community.
Big one. Yeah, that's a good one. You guys are doing really well on this. Okay, what else? It doesn't have to be anything else, but just whatever you think of.
Culture.
Culture. Yeah. Matter of fact, we're going to spend some time today, hopefully, talking about culture in religion. What else?
Afterlife.
Yeah.
I would also say slash reincarnation, because some religions believe in that over afterlife.
Yeah, we'll get plenty of that when we get to Hinduism. That's our first major religion we're going to talk about. But we'll just call it afterlife, because it's life after life after life after life when it's reincarnation, isn't it? Okay, what else?
Judgment. A lot of religions believe
Okay.
God will give you your final judgment, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and so that's can't see that there. Let me okay, but that's kind of the reward and punishment thing. But that's another, there are a lot of ways to say the same thing and get a different perspective on these.
I'm not sure if anyone else is having the same issue, but I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Is everybody else able to hear me?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, so who was that who said that? Yasmin? No. Who was it said they couldn't hear me? Maybe they can't hear me.
He's asking who can't hear him again. What was it?
Okay, somebody Yasmin put in forgiveness. Okay, so that's. This is all pretty positive stuff. Ever have any negative thoughts when you think about religion?
I'm
Well,
just
I
gonna
guess.
say
Go
doubt.
ahead.
I feel like some people have doubt in it. It's like the opposite of faith, I guess. Or trust.
Okay, yeah. So doubt is definitely a part. I mean, it's part of the process, right? Anything else you think of?
I've also seen sometimes people that believe in one religion that sees another religion that kind of opposes their beliefs.
Sure.
Sometimes
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
argue.
Yeah. And so what we can call sectarianism. It happens between religions and within religions, where people just, judge the heck out of each other and basically say that, we're the only ones who've got it right. And okay, and Tia's coming back in. She's coming back in. Okay. Let me
On top of that, if it gets to that point, war.
War. I was waiting for somebody to say that. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. But boy, we sure do a lot of it, don't we? And honestly, realistically, if you look at the history of humankind, just about every war in human history has had religion as a major motivating factor. Thought we were getting away from religious wars with World War I and World War II, and maybe even Korea, but in Vietnam wasn't a religious war. And thought, okay, at least now we're just fighting over just selfishness and power, right? But we've gone back to our old ways. The wars that we're experiencing, for the last 30 years or so, have been a lot of religious motivation in wars. I think that's enough. Anybody have anything else we can talk about? We're going to go through and try and look at this from a lot of different ways, but we're already making good progress. So how would you sum that up? If somebody says, what is religion? Well, it's God, beliefs, faith, reward, morals, trust, lifestyle, sectarianism, community, culture, afterlife, punishment, judgment, norms and standards, forgiveness, doubt, and war. And, that's a lot to talk about. And depending on what your experience is at the present time and in the past, and what you anticipate, the struggles that you're feeling with regard to any of this, these things can blow up and become really, really significant. And everybody's going to have a different aspect. Some people are really, I'm just thinking about, faith and trust, or I'm just, my focus is on the community, or my focus is on, the things that I do, and, or forgiveness, or, my focus is on war. It's really a hard job to try and define religion. When I took my first comparative religion, world religions course during my master's level work, I'd already done a lot of courses in religion, had a lot of experience with various religions, but as far as academic work, when I first took a course, and the guy who ended up being my supervisor in the Ph.D. program, Jim Chancellor, he spent the first 2 weeks of the term just talking about trying to define religion, and then we had an essay test that we had to take about 4 weeks into the term. And there were 3 questions. And one of them, we had to write an essay on all 3 of them. We had like 2 hours to write in class. And one of them was, what is religion? Well, we just spent 2 weeks talking about all these details, but how do you come up with an answer? Well, that's what we want to try and do now, is we want to try and begin to answer some of this stuff. So with that in mind, I'm going to change screens here again. And let's go back to this here. So I'm going to start off with what I think is a sensible working definition that we can just start off with. It's pretty simple. Doesn't have a whole lot of detail. It's just plain Jane. It's the vanilla of definitions, and I like vanilla without any complications. I love other things too, but vanilla is a good place to start. Just neutral. It doesn't give every flavor and every essence, but it's good enough, to eat. So this is a working definition from a former professor at College of DuPage, who's retired now. He was the head of the philosophy and religious studies department at College of DuPage, Kent Richter. Matter of fact, he's the guy who brought me to College of DuPage to teach. And this book that he wrote called Religion, a Study in Beauty, Truth, and Goodness is actually the textbook that I use in my Introduction to Religion course that I teach at College of DuPage. And he goes through in his first chapter, looks at a bunch of different definitions that we're going to look at, and then concludes it with this one. And so I thought we would start with this one. I'm one of these people that when I get a mystery novel, I turn to the last page to see who did it. And then I go back and read the rest of the novel. I can't wait that long to get to the end to find out. Then I enjoy the novel more. I can see, who done it as they begin. I'm one of those kind of people. I can't wait. I've got to get the answer now, and then I'll go back and explore it. Anyway, so that's what this is. He says religion is a complex set of reasonably interwoven beliefs, behaviors, and experiences rooted in some notion of a transmundane ultimate being. In other words, a being who's not of this world. Now, most people call that being God. But not all religions have the same idea of God. As a matter of fact, I often hear people talking about, well, I don't believe in God. And I say, well, tell me what you mean by God. I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist or an agnostic, or I just don't believe it. I don't believe, in God. Say, well, what do you mean by God? And then they tell me, say, oh, I don't believe in that God either. I don't believe that either. They've got some idea of what God is, some notion of this ultimate being. And if that's what, I knew, I wouldn't believe that either. So anyway, so a couple of things here. First of all, religion is complex. It is. There's no simple way to describe it or anything like that. We've got to explore it, and it's very complex. And it's a set of reasonably interwoven beliefs. They may not be reasonable to me or to you, but they're reasonable to the person who believes them, or they wouldn't believe it. It's reasonable to them. It's reasonably interwoven. It makes sense to them and on some level. Seems right. So it's beliefs and behaviors that they feel are right, that they believe or understand to be the right behaviors, and also experiences that they have. But it's all rooted in some sort of a connection to an ultimate being. Sometimes, though, it's not really an ultimate being when we get to things like Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. There really isn't an ultimate God, an ultimate being. There is being rather than a being, and we will talk about that. That's one of the things we're going to do. Some people's idea of what the divine or the ultimate is a person that you can relate to, you can pray to, you can hear from, that you can interact with, you can have some sort of ongoing interaction and conversation with them. But there are many traditions, where the ultimate being doesn't speak, doesn't have any personal attributes. So we'll be talking about that soon, not today, but soon. So that's where we're going to start. I think this is a good summary. I wish I had had this when I took that that first test, essay test in my graduate work on religion. I would have started with this and then unpacked it. So that's essentially what we're going to do here. So the word religion is based on the Latin religare. I guess that's how it's pronounced. I didn't take Latin, but yeah. And it means, the religare means to bind, to make loyal. In other words, to bind yourself to something or someone voluntarily. In other words, to chain yourself to someone, to hug someone, to pick out someone and or something and to be loyal to it, to commit to it. So religion involves commitment to it. It's this idea of attaching to something so significant that you don't want to let go, not because you're afraid that it's going to throw you in fire, that is some, mean, vengeful super being that's going to, whack you over the head every time you make a mistake. I don't believe in that either. Most people don't believe in that. But anyway, so it's the idea that you bind yourself to something. You make a commitment because you want that commitment. You don't want to let go. So, as a matter of fact, if you were to go back to Rome around the time of Jesus, the 1st century, there were all kinds of religions in the Roman Empire. Judaism was one of them. Christianity became a new religion in the Roman Empire. But there were all kinds of religions with ideas of what is ultimate, various gods and things like that. But if you ask somebody, are you religious? They wouldn't even understand what you're talking about. The word religion, the origin of the word that we call religion, is not something that was something that people talked about. Matter of fact, in the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, there is no, matter of fact, in the Hebrew language, now there is in modern Hebrew a word for religion, but in ancient Hebrew, there's no word for religion. There's no word for it. It's just something that human that people do. We'll talk more about this as we move on. All right, so one of the problems with religion is that we're gonna, just like we did with all these here, gotta find my, with all these things here, there are a lot of details. And so trying to figure out what religion is, in order to do this, we're gonna literally have to go and dig up the past. We're gonna have to, dig into history and see what we can, dust off and understand about the origins of all these religious traditions. So there's a lot of history that we have to do in this course. It's, you say, okay, somebody's a Christian today and they believe these things, but where did these things come from and how did that develop and what's the whole history of Christianity, etc. So this is a silly video that we're going to watch, and this is an area where my system doesn't cooperate as much as I would like it to. So I'm going to have to be real careful with the volume here to make sure that you can hear it. But this is just a YouTube video looking at the Beatles. Where are the Beatles, right? See this picture, something's wrong in this picture, but we'll see that. But it's looking at the Beatles from the year 3000, looking back on the Beatles and what happened in this millennia, in the last century, and the impact that the Beatles had. So it's a kind of a it's a funny bit. It's ironic, sarcastic. It's punny. It's designed to be entertainment. But it illustrates the problem that we have in trying to dig up, the origins and the basic ideas of these religions. In that, what archaeologists do is they dig up trash, what's left of ancient civilizations, and they look through the trash and say, oh, here's this and here's this, and now I can know a little bit about these people because it's the stuff that survived, right? Just imagine if you take your trash out at night and somebody really wants to know about you, so they go grab your trash bag out of the dumpster, and they open it up and they start looking at all the stuff you threw away to get a hint at what's going on in your life. You see this on TV where people, police are digging through trash to try and find evidence of a crime, different things like that. Well, that's what you have to do in digging up history. That's what archaeologists do. They literally dig up the remnants of the past. So that's the story of this, and that's the context. We understand, but when they get this information, they put it together in a totally different context, and it doesn't, and it kind of looks weird and sounds weird. So hang in there. We're going to go ahead and do it here, if I can get it to work.
It's astounding to realize that it's been over 1,000 years since the Beatles walked the earth.
First-hand records are certainly scarce. There's a lot that we don't know about the Beatles, but we do know that these four young men, John Lennon, Paul McKenzie, Greg Hutchinson, and Scottie Pippen, were some of the finest musicians that have ever existed.
The Beatles rose to prominence when they traveled from their native Linverton to America to perform at Ed Sullivan's annual Woodstock Festival.
Americans were shocked. I mean, at this time, the overwhelming style of music was opera. No one had ever heard of any piece of music that was less than 3 hours long. The Beatles changed all of that.
And they were so prolific. They had so many hit songs. Paperback Writer, Ticket to Run, Wipeout.
Don't Stop Believing, Parents Just Don't Understand, Jimmy Crack Corn, Battle Hymn of the Republic.
And what's truly amazing is that they wrote all of these songs with only the notes A through G. Musical notation had not yet been expanded to B.
Their music dominated the charts, even with competition from such rivals as Michael Jackson, Louis Armstrong, and Ernest Hemingway. It seemed there was nothing the Beatles couldn't accomplish.
1965, Shea Stadium, the Beatles win the Super Bowl, 21-7 against the Giants. It was an immense event in the history of athletics, and it did quite a bit to raise the nation's spirits after the assassination of President Nixon.
For a while, they acted in a television series. It's called I Love Lucy. The prosthetics and makeup on the show was just incredible. You couldn't tell it was them.
They invented the thumbs up. It's a gesture you don't see much anymore, but people would do this to each other, and the Beatles were the first to do it.
And they were pioneers even in animation. Paul McKenzie, just pen to paper, just doodling around. Next thing you know, we have Mickey Mouse.
Perhaps the Beatles' greatest accomplishment came with the release of their groundbreaking album, Sgt. Pet Sounds and the Spiders from Asia.
Sadly, no copies of this album remain. They were all fed to Emperor Gorlock in 2652. However, I've taken it upon myself to form one of the finest beatology teams in the world. We have reconstructed ancient sheet music in the hopes of determining what this album might have sounded like. These are our findings.
Soon after the album's release, rumors began to circulate that the Beatles would break up. They, of course, did not, and for decades they continued to grow in popularity and size, adding new members each year. Today, their influence can be seen everywhere, from the species of insect that was named after them to the children who make wishes on their laps each Beatmas.
You know, as we sit here and talk about the Beatles, One thing is perfectly clear. The Beatles' music will live forever in the hearts of those who had their hearts frozen while the Beatles were still alive.
Join us next week as we profile Orson Welles, the filmmaker behind the scathing Vietnam War critique, Dracula, Dead and Loving It.
Okay. Turn down the volume here a little bit. Hopefully you could hear that. It is available for you to just click on the YouTube video in Blackboard if you want to review it under sample documents. But here, let me. Oops. Okay. Now, let's not look at that yet. So the idea here is we're going to get little pieces of the picture, and we've got to put it together and make sense of it. And a lot of times the sense that we make of it is not going to be what it meant to the people, meant to anybody in the past, or even means anybody today. So, Scottie Pippen played for the Bulls, never been in the Beatles, right? It's not a musician, but that's kind of, it's real easy to get all this stuff wrong, right? So we need to approach this with some amount of humility, that we can learn a lot of things and we can get a lot of details, but we just need to be calm and not jump to conclusions. And the hardest thing in studying religion is not to judge. We have all of us have opinions. All of us have feelings. All of us have, things that we think, and they're really, really important to us. And we feel very strongly about them. And particularly when it comes to religion, this is something that people feel very deeply. They feel very deeply for it or against it, but nobody's neutral on the subject of religion. But as students here, I'm not trying to teach you, I'm not trying to make you Jewish. I'm Jewish, not trying to make you Jewish. I'm not trying to make you a Christian, I'm not trying to make you a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist or anything else. Whatever you are, that's your business. It's not mine. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand people that have a different perspective than we do. And that's hard to do as really in any subject, but especially in religion, to set aside our opinions, the glasses that we see things through, the lenses that we see things through, and just say, okay, that's what I see, but I want to understand what they see. What is the experience? What does it mean to be a Buddhist? What does that feel like to the Buddhist? And that means I've got to set aside my opinions that I might have about whether anything in Buddhism is good or bad or appropriate, right? And this is hard to do. And it's a process to set our own subjectivity, our own opinions aside, and just look and see what other people are saying. Then we can learn something from them, whether we adopt it or not. That's not the subject of this course. Now, you may, find stuff in this that's interesting to you, all right, that you might be able to incorporate in your own life one way or another. But I don't think you should be in a hurry to do that, because a lot of times what you think you hear, what you think you understand, you're misperceiving. And if you go out and follow that, it's not going to work for you. So just, try and this is a battle. We got to constantly try and set ourselves apart. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here, though, with a little bit more detail, and we're just going to get into this a little bit. So we're going to look at various scholars from all different types of disciplines who have looked at the subject of religion and tried to describe it, tried to define it. So we're going to see what their contribution, what do they see, what do they understand to be the essential elements of what religion is. And this is going to take us the 10 minutes that we have left, and it's going to take us all of, or probably most of, if not all of. All right, anyway, so let's start with a fellow by name of Medford Spiro. Now this is kind of agonizing to go through all this definition part, but just hang in there. Medford Spiro was a contemporary postmodern anthropologist. I'm not going to get into you know what an anthropologist is? An anthropologist is someone who studies people. They study people. Anthropos is the Greek for human, for a man or a woman. And so ology is the study of, so an anthropologist is someone who does anthropology, the study of humans. And most anthropologists look at humankind in its various cultural manifestations. And Medford Spiro was what we call a cultural anthropologist. Anyway, here's what he says. The R stands for religion in all these notes. Religion is an institution consisting of culturally patterned interaction with culturally postulated superhuman beings. Well, that's pretty dry sounding. It's not very inspiring, is it? Can you imagine this guy coming to speak at your worship gathering over the weekend and saying, our guest speaker today is Medford Spiro, and he's going to talk about, religion. Oh, this should be really inspiring. Yes, well, let's start off with a prayer, a culturally patterned prayer to our culturally postulated superhuman being. Oh, culturally postulated, would not really be very inspiring. But what he has to say is really important. Let's talk about a few things here. First of all, he says religion is an institution or a system or a structure, right? It's an institution. And that institution consists of culturally patterned interactions. In other words, what he's saying here is what somebody mentioned when we were talking about different elements of religion. He's saying that basically religion is produced by human beings as they gather together and form a culture. And the result, the religion for that people is something that reflects the way that they're living, their culture, their experience, their living experience. And one of the things about religion is it is an experience. We'll talk more about this as we get into it, but religion is more than anything else. It's a human experience. You can't prove anything in religion. You can't prove supposed truths or any of that stuff. I mean, you just can't prove it. But it's something that bubbles out of our human existence, and it is first of all something that somebody else mentioned, community, when we're talking about this. It's something that happens in community. It happens for the individual, but it happens for individuals who are part of a community and they form a culture. So anyway, and then of course he talks about culturally postulated human beings. What he's saying here is, the old story is from Genesis that when God created the man and the woman, God created the man and the woman in the image and likeness of God. Does that mean that we look like God? No, the image and likeness is character, essence. Right. And so that God created us, but in religion, it's essentially reversed. We create God in our image. So, I can't believe my God would never allow evil to prevail. That's your idea of God. My God is a God of love. And love is the most important thing about God. That's your beginning to picture God, create an image of who and what God is, right? And this is what we do in religion. So it's not like that God spoke and said, okay, here's what I expect, here's what you're supposed to think, and here's what you're supposed to do. No thought, no no comments from the peanut gallery, no options. That's not the way religion works. Anyway, so it is an institution of human culture, and we do create God or gods in our own images. There are two words that come into play here. Hello, come back on. There we go. Saw my dog there. Picture of my dog. Okay. There are two words that we use when we try to talk about God. We talk about what's known as an anthropopathism. Anthropos means human, man, right? And pathism means feeling. So we ascribe feelings to God, but they're human feelings. So we say God is angry. That's a human feeling ascribed to God. God is happy. God is blessed. God, these are, even love. God is loving. God is merciful. God is kind. These are human things that we're now applying to God. We're describing them in human language, so it's an anthropopathism. There are also I can't write tonight. Anthropomorphism. Morphe means form. So when we talk about God and say God has eyes that see all. Well, God doesn't have physical eyes that see all, but it's a human form applied to God to say that God sees, God perceives, or God's arm is a mighty arm, mighty to save. Well, God doesn't have a big, powerful arm. God's a spirit. God is not a human being, right? So these are anthropomorphisms. This is taking ideas about God and using human descriptions because that's all we know, right? You can't see God, so we describe God that way. And so that's what he's talking about here. We really do talk about God and imagine God, conceive of God, perceive God based on what we see as the best, kind of like the perfect version of everything that is human, the ultimate version of everything is human. All right, so get back to PowerPoint here. Next guy, I just want to mention here in a few minutes that we have here, this guy by the name of Friedrich Schleiermacher. This is one that you don't want to have to pronounce or spell. That's why I provide the notes for you. This is not easy, but he was a German philosopher. Actually, Spiro died in about 1969, I think, so last century. Most of these guys are long dead that were looking at their stuff. But anyway, Friedrich Schleiermacher died in 1834. He was a German philosopher. And he said the essence of religion, what religion is at its core, the character, the essence of religion, consists in the feeling of an absolute dependence. And that's something we see a lot of, where people say, for me, I just trust God. I'm just totally dependent on God. I don't worry about anything else, but my dependence is upon God. I look to God for whatever it is. But this is a response. It's a feeling. Feelings are a response. And so religion does involve feeling. So that's what one of the things that Schleiermacher says about religion. These feelings dominate our sense of relationship to the universe around us. Because really, the way I really see this is what religion is. It's our way of understanding. It's what we understand our position and our in the universe, who we are at our core, and how we relate to all of existence, people, God, the universe, everything. It's our perspective. That's what religion is. And then, so these feelings dominate our sense of relationship to the universe around us. Alfred North Whitehead was a philosopher of science, but he had a few things to say about religion as well. He died in 1947. He says that religion is what an individual does with his or her solitariness. When you're all alone, when you have nothing to prop you up, no people, no stuff, it's just you alone in the universe. What you do in that moment is religion. So people who, so it's what you do when you're all alone. Religion is therefore produced by the individual as they face the universe. And religion helps us to pass what I call the loneliness test, when it's just us, no support from anything. When we're all on our own, that's when we experience direct interaction with the nature of reality itself. No crutches, just reality itself. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about religion on an individual level. It is ourselves in the universe, all by ourselves. That's where it's produced. It's what you do in those moments. Immanuel Kant, great philosopher, said that religion is the recognition of all of our duties as divine commands. So Kant's idea is that God is the sovereign, the king of the universe, in charge of everything, is the creator, and God has given us moral imperatives. God has commands for us, good things that God wants us to do, purpose, and all of that kind of stuff. So for Kant, his major focus in talking about religion is ethics, or working out of what he calls moral imperatives. So that's Kant. And we can't go any further tonight because we are out of time. So this is what we're going to call it. Enough for tonight. I promise I'll be better organized next time because I'll have some of these bugs worked out with my system here.